So I grew up believing that the Black Panthers were basically a violent armed militia group who were racist and anti-white.
Right.
And that basically they wanted to eliminate white people. They wanted to take over, and that our government, our police departments, were basically in this huge fight and battle with this group, and they were just trying to defend America.
To protect the American way.
Right. So needless to say, I was genuinely a little surprised to find out that it was actually, in fact, quite the opposite.
Hey everybody, I'm Richard Thomas.
And I'm Tiffany Thomas.
And we are in February 2021. And February means two things in my book.
Uh-huh.
It means Super Bowls.
Yeah.
And it means that small little itty bitty thing called the shortest month of the year, which we have now become belovedly fond of as Negroes History Month, otherwise known as Black History Month.
Uh-huh.
And so we want to welcome everybody to Black History Month.
Yeah.
I personally live history of blacks every day. So I don't think we should be segmented just to a month, but I appreciate the intent of it, the foundation of it, the goal of it, the intent of it. I think it is time for America for us to grow beyond a single month.
Absolutely.
How about incorporating it into our real history? Like,
wouldn't that be something?
the history they teach in elementary school and junior high school and high school. Let's stop whitewashing America, huh?
Yeah, I agree.
And as beautiful as white is, or it can be, there's a lot of beauty in black. And we are proud to be black. We are proud of our black community. We are proud of our origins, and we want to tell our story loud and proud. And one of the most fundamental truths of the black community has been protection of one another. Mm-hmm. Standing up for one another in adversity, not frailing back, but we consistently rise for the best of us.
Yeah.
And we rise for even the worst of us. We defend one another with our lives, with our effort, with our finances, with our families, and with our history. And a lot of people think that what we need to do is we need to fix something that was broken, right?
Right.
But the reality of America is that it's a world that wasn't broken.
It's not broken.
Right? It was a foundation of ice, a foundation that was built like a frozen lake. Mm-hmm. And as long as we're living in times of cold, it's not a problem. Right. As long as those cracks aren't really exposed for what they are, that we were a nation founded in racism, when you have a line that all men were created equal.
Right.
But in that context, you have slavery going on in your nation.
Yeah.
You are building a foundation on a frozen lake.
Right.
You have what you believe is a strong core belief, and it is a strong core belief, and it's powerful in and of itself. But when it starts warming up outside and the tension starts getting a little bit tougher, and people start struggling as far as economically, or we get a world virus like the coronavirus, right? All of a sudden now we begin to feel the fractures that were in our foundation from the beginning begin to reveal themselves. And so we talk about those fractures because we want to heal those fractures in establishing and creating a new foundation based on truth. Right. And if we don't build our foundation on truth, then we're in trouble. Right. And there's certainly a chief cornerstone to that we try to build the principles of our life off of and so forth. But if you're building it off of a lie and a deception, and one of the most deceptive truths that has been taught throughout American history is about the Black Panther movement. Right. About the Black Panther Party. Mm-hmm. And so you and I are talking as we normally do, and we're throwing ideas around about what maybe the Lionheart Institute audience might want to talk about or hear about in February. And I was really kind of surprised as I'm throwing out things about the Black Panther Party, how proud I am of them, how excited I am about what they've done for society.
Right.
And it's bouncing off of a history contextualized in your world that they're the bad guys.
Yeah.
Right? And so I know obviously I could give a history lesson on who they were, but I'd like us to have more of a dialogue. So if you're at home or you're sitting with your kids or you're driving down the street, you can kind of regurgitate some of these thoughts to your mind and kind of come to a place where you say, hey, what are my opinions and my thoughts about the Black Panther Party? How was my beliefs established about them? And then you can begin to recontextualize the way that history's been taught.
Right.
Because if we don't really know the true history of our nation, we're bound to repeat it.
Well, and as we were talking about Black History Month, and one thing that we had talked about that was important to us is we wanted to share a story every week from the history, right? But we wanted to share something that had been historically just turned around and made into something that it wasn't,
right.
Or somebody's story that was told in a way that the truth really was never told correctly. And we kind of dialogued a little bit about this when we talked about the Black Panthers, because I remember growing up and some of the things that you were telling me was very surprising, and I was like, what? Like, I don't understand. So I grew up believing that the Black Panthers were basically a violent armed militia group who were racist and anti-white.
Right.
And that basically they wanted to eliminate white people. They wanted to take over, and that our government, our police departments, were basically in this huge fight and battle with this group, and they were trying to defend America.
To protect the American way.
Right. So needless to say, I was genuinely a little surprised to find out that It was actually, in fact, quite the opposite. Right. And so for me, this was one of the first stories I felt really just inclined to want to tell, just for justice, for the truth to get out there, because what the Black Panther Party stood for was so much bigger and so much greater.
Absolutely.
That story was never really told to anybody in that fashion before.
And I think it's important that people learn like you have, right? Like so many of our brothers and sisters have, to seek out truth for themselves.
Yeah,
right?
For sure.
There's so many people that I get into huge dialogues about topics on Facebook or social media platforms, and it's shocking to me that they absolutely have no clue about the truth. And what's even scarier is that they establish their non-truth so fundamentally in the depths of their mind, right? Yeah. That it has to be the way that they were told, because they were told it, and they were told it by who they assumed were good people.
Right.
The reality is the people that taught them either didn't know or were more concerned about protecting the narrative that was being told in the world that we lived in, that they omitted the truth. And when you build a house on lies, we begin to see what is happening still in America today.
Well, I mean, the Black Panther Party was started over 50 years ago. And even just a couple years ago, I think it was a couple years ago now, where Beyonce came out for her halftime show dressed in Black Panther stuff, and people lost their shit over it.
There were protests and massive...
Yes, they were highly offended. Like, how dare Beyonce dress up as a Black Panther? Do you know who the Black Panthers really were? Like, really, genuinely, white people were very upset.
Right. Terrified almost.
Over her essentially recognizing it and praising it and glorifying it. And for white America, that was not acceptable at all.
So in a lot of people's minds, the Black Panther Party was established to terrorize. Yes. They were called, obviously they were called terrorist group in the context of the time period, right? They were, the finger was pointed at them, and so they were the bad guys, right? That they were there to intimidate and frighten.
They were villainized, for sure.
But as you begin to look at the Black Panther Party through a different set of eyes, right? Not that there aren't two truths to every story, right? And then a third one that probably reveals the real truth, right? But as you begin to look at them through a new set of eyes, right? A fresh perspective, explain some of the things that you discovered, why the party was created, and why it's so important that they establish that truth in America.
So this actually starts back to 1961, and two young college guys met up by the name of Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. Anyway, they were in college at Merritt University down in, I believe it was Oakland, California.
Oakland.
I believe is where the college is. Anyway, so they both had attended this protest. The college had a day called Pioneer Day, and they were celebrating all the residents from the 1800s who moved to California and settled California. And so they were part of a group that was protesting that because they felt it did not in any way talk about the Black Americans that were part of settling America.
Sure.
So what they did is they actually created a group called the Negro History Fact Group, which basically pushed colleges to start teaching a class of specifically Black history and how African Americans were part of that. So that is essentially where Bobby and Huey originally met. And then following the assassination of Malcolm X, who they both greatly respected and followed, especially his ideologies and things like that, following shortly after his assassination, a young teenage Black boy by the name of Matthew Johnson. I just wanted to make sure I got his name right. He was actually killed by the Oakland police, and he was unarmed, and he was just walking home. And so that kind of prompted Bobby and Huey to say, enough is enough. And so
stealing from or not adopting from Malcolm's speech, obviously, by any means necessary.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
That the passive approach, solely nonviolent, which we are a proponent of.
Right.
I personally believe that it is the greatest pathway to restoration is a nonviolent approach. Right. But when that approach failed,
yes.
Right, to take up defense of yourself and defense of your community. Right.
Yeah. So in 1965, they started the Black Panthers. Now, the original name was actually the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. And I think most people don't know that those two words actually existed as part of the party.
Sure.
Their official name. Of course, eventually, people just shortened it to Black Panthers, the Black Panther Party. But essentially, they created this organization to defend themselves and the Black community against police brutality, especially in Oakland. That was kind of like the primary goal because it was out of control. The police were out of control, and so it was a very violent time for them, for Black communities. And so they created this to defend the Black community against the Oakland police. So that's where they started. That's where this all came from. That was the birthing place of this, yes. Now, of course, by 1968, multiple Black Panther parties spread across the United States.
Sure.
There was thousands of members from LA to Chicago, New York, and Philadelphia. And so that was kind of where it started. The initial, of course, started in Oakland, then began to spread across the United States.
And they traveled.
They did travel.
And they helped establish these chapters.
Yes,
of
multiple
the party.
chapters, correct.
And as it grew, obviously, defense of the community became their primary target at first,
yes.
Right? Which gathered a tremendous amount of attention, right? Black people all dressed in a similar outfit, right?
Right, and their uniform was picked very specifically because one thing that Huey had said is that all Black people pretty much had this in their closet.
Right.
So that way anybody could dress like them and be part of them and stand for what they stood for, and it wouldn't cost them a lot of money to go buy some uniform to be part of it.
Right, and they could participate.
Yes.
Their voice would be heard.
Yes.
Strength of unity, which we still seek in our community today, and we'll get to this a little bit. But one of the first white terrorist organizations ever recognized by the FBI was birthed out of it, and we stood in solidarity with them as well, and they stood with us. And when I say that, I mean the Black Panther Party of Self-Defense. Yeah. But beyond just self-defense, which they're marching on the Capitol, right, and all of a sudden now the world doesn't see the Second Amendment as quite the same.
Yes,
right.
Yes.
Some different opinions begin to flare about that. No violent crimes committed. Right. No acts of aggression.
Right.
Just acts of self-defense.
Yes.
Right. Certainly a loud, bold, strong statement about the lengths that they were willing to go to protect protect their own community. But what did they stand for beyond just defense of the community?
So they actually created what they called a 10-point program. And this encompassed the organization's philosophic views along with political views and agenda. And basically, their 10-point program called for an immediate end to police brutality was the first thing. Employment for all African Americans, the ability to own land, decent housing that was fit for an actual human being, proper education for their kids.
Imagine that.
Right. Equal medical care, and justice for all. I mean, and if you think about it, those are all basic things that all of us white people have the access to. And so it's very
and
shocking.
sadly, things we still are struggling for nationwide still
Yes.
today. Many of those talking points are true in communities of color, for people of color.
Right.
Also true for extremely poor or lower middle class
Right.
Caucasians as well. What we're
Right.
beginning to discover in America is that there is a bleeding of racism more into classism.
Yes.
And they stood for the opportunity for everyone, whatever their belief system, whatever their background, whatever their racial makeup, that freedom and that liberty would be for all.
Well, it was surprising to me after what I had grown up to believe about the Black Panther Party, that the stuff that their 10-point program, their fundamental beliefs were founded on was basic human rights. I mean, they weren't
Sure.
asking to overthrow a democracy. They weren't asking for things that other people didn't already have. They just wanted to be treated like human beings.
Right.
So they were fighting for that for the Black communities because they weren't being treated that way.
And it was well documented, well received throughout the country, obviously, that the 1960s, when this particular party was established,
Yeah.
was a time of turmoil around the world, right?
Right.
And so they stepped up as a voice to say change must come, and it cannot come tomorrow. It must come today.
Well, and I think it was shocking for people
Sure.
to all of a sudden see this group of militant Black men and women. There were women that were also part of the Black Panthers Party, for those that didn't know that.
I think it's important to understand that they were at one point led.
Yes, there was a woman at one point that did
Their primary leader. Yeah.
did actually led the party. Funny enough, interesting, or not funny enough, but shocking enough, but Shaka Khan was actually part of the Black Panther Party when she was a teenager. But I think what happened was the world was not prepared, or let me rephrase this. White America
Sure.
was not prepared to see a group of armed Black people standing up for their rights.
Defending themselves. Yeah.
Saying, hey, you can no longer treat us this way. And they weren't doing anything illegal. They were not doing anything against white people. They were using their Second Amendment right to bear arms.
Sure.
And that was that, Their basic thing was, we're not firing first. We're not going to attack first, but we're sure as hell going to defend ourselves when you do.
Right. It's kind of my mama teaching me and my daddy teaching me, right, son, I never want you to swing first.
Right.
But when you start swinging, don't dare stop.
Right.
Finish the
Absolutely.
fight. And I think that it's really important that we understood that we wanted to protect ourselves.
Yeah.
In the time of us just being cushion pins
Yeah.
or dummies to be beat up at your will was over, right? And so we went to that extent. But more importantly even than the self-defense, because
Yeah.
I think the self-defense is beautiful. I think
Right.
it's amazing.
I agree.
I think that when a people are empowered enough to say, hey, we're going to protect ourselves and we're going to protect one another,
Yeah.
then naturally the next step or the next evolution is bound to follow, which
Right.
says, hey, we're not satisfied with just protecting the lives that we have,
Yeah.
but we want to develop our community.
Yes.
And so it's so important that the Black Panther Party was expressly committed to that. So can you talk a little bit about the community programs that they
Yeah.
started and their kind of their mindset?
So this generally surprised me, and I'll totally admit that, because again, this isn't anything that we were taught in history class. But the Black Panther Party, under the leadership of Huey directly, he started over 60 community programs within the Black communities. And these, of course, spread across the United States within all their chapters. Most of their chapters were actually required to continue on and start these programs as well. So I'm just going to run the list on a few of them because
Awesome.
they're really surprising. So they started food banks. They started medical clinics. They started sickle cell anemia testing. They started prison busing for families of inmates. They started legal advice seminars. They started clothing banks, housing co-ops, and they also started ambulance services within the Black communities. Now, these are things I think most people take for granted and think, well,
Sure.
why wouldn't
If I
they?
get sick, somebody's coming to get me.
Right. They would think, well, why wouldn't this be part of the communities already? But they weren't. They
Right.
weren't accessible to Black communities. And so they just said enough was enough. Again, we're going to start helping our communities. And I don't think that people genuinely associate Black Panthers with community service programs,
which was really the heartbeat of what they did.
Right.
And a lot of times, and hopefully we'll continue on this topic because I think it's so important. The fingers pointed at the Black Panthers as being this racist organization that fueled racial hate, that was against the whitey, right? And white America was against them. But that's simply not the truth. In most of the cases, these community outreach programs, such as their morning food bank, right, where they fed the community and they fed children, right? What these organizations did is they would go to local neighborhood grocery stores. There was no such thing as African American owned grocery stores. Yeah. They would go to the local grocery store owned by Caucasian Americans. They would present the case for these poor little children. Yeah. And they would partner with these grocery stores who would say, hey, listen, we want to give you an abundance. Now you have to understand this wasn't about tax write-offs, right? It wasn't about them getting financial benefits for doing it. It wasn't for any of those motives. It was because the hearts of the Black Panthers and these grocery store owners connected, and they knew and they understood that our community could not rise as long as our children were hungry. Right.
Yeah, that's actually one of the biggest programs they're the most well known for. There's two really big ones that they established. The first one was the Black Panther Breakfast Program, which they started in 1969. And as you were saying, they went to local grocery stores, they got donations. Not only did that, but they spoke to health experts and nutritionists because they wanted to make sure that the children they were feeding had good nutritional breakfasts. Right. You know, the truth is most of these kids went without breakfast on a daily basis. You know, they went to school hungry and starving and malnourished, and they can't learn in that. Sure. And you know, some school principals actually said that there was a night and day difference in the children because they were no longer falling asleep in class from just exhaustion and no energy, and they weren't crying anymore because they weren't having all these horrible stomach cramps because they were starving. So powerful. And they said these kids began to flourish and actually participate and learn. And what's really interesting about this too is the program only lasted for a few years. Unfortunately, because J. Edgar Hoover had a personal agenda against the Black Panther Party, and this was one community service program that they created that he highly despised.
J. Edgar Hoover being the overseer of the FBI.
The head of the FBI, right. Yes. So he actually personally stated, in regards to the free breakfast program, potentially the program was potentially the greatest threat to their efforts by authorities to neutralize the Black Panther Party and destroy what it stands for.
And the concept is still true today. If you can cause people to believe that an organization is not there to serve you, then you won't willingly participate in the change and growth, right?
Well, J. Edgar Hoover went as far as telling authorities across the United States to destroy the free breakfast program and all the chapters.
Heartbreaking.
So here's just a list of a few of the things that happened. In San Francisco, police actually went door to door to parents, telling them that the food was actually infected with STDs. I mean, that's insane. In Oakland and Baltimore, Black Panther members were actually harassed and beaten in front of children who were there to get their free breakfasts. In Chicago, the police actually broke into one of the food storage units the Black Panthers had. They destroyed all the food, and on top of it, they pissed all over the food just to make a point. Right. I mean, it's asinine that they would take something that was made to help children, you know, and destroy it like that. Now, the Black Panther program actually is the reason why we have a free breakfast program now across the United States of America. The USDA actually stepped in 2 years later, and when the government was like,
when they saw the fall off.
Yes, when they saw what they had done, the positivity that came from that, and then the USDA and the government was like, we should probably do something about this. Right. And so when the collapse of that food program happened with the Black Panthers, then the USDA stepped in with the government and they created the free breakfast program, which still exists exist today.
Which is a testament to any of our struggles that we
Right.
go through, right? That sometimes we aren't able to bring a campaign all the way to the finish line.
Right.
But by making noise, by lifting our voice, those around us may find a spark that brings it to the finish line. And that's so important. And one of the greatest quotes of all time was, just imagine how much we could get done if nobody cared who got the credit.
I know.
Right? Now, unfortunately, the credit for much of the change that's happened in America was taken from the Black Panther Party.
Right.
Which, if they would have correctly left it where it belonged and taught children throughout history the truth of the party, there would be far less division right now. Right?
Yeah.
Our children would understand and respect one another for the fact that it's important that we stand up for what we believe.
Yeah.
And we stand up for what is right. Right? That it's always right, as Dr. King would say.
Yeah.
To do the right thing. Right? It's always the right time to do the right thing. And this organization was defamed, torn apart by the FBI.
Yeah.
Even history books today tell a very false story
Yeah.
about who they were, what they stood for. Many people now, even up to this day, are harassed over, as you said about Beyonce, about their support of the Black Panther Party and what they stood for, not correctly understanding that the truth was a deception portrayed to America.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so it's important to keep studying, keep seeking out the truth, and keep standing for what is true and just.
Well, another one of the community programs that's really important that the Black Panther Party started was People's Free Medical Clinics. Now, this was huge, absolutely huge, because in 1965, the Medicare and Medicaid Act was passed, which made it illegal to provide any kind of federal funding to any hospital or medical private practice that discriminated against minorities. But unfortunately, because nobody was there to actually enforce it, minorities, especially in the Black communities, were denied health care service, and decent healthcare service at that.
Right.
Even if they saw treatment, most of them just were greatly mistreated and did not receive proper care at all.
And we do an interview series that I love, and I know our viewers love it that are able to tune into it. And that's one of the topics we want to really take on. So if you're in that profession, or if you have some thoughts about the injustice, the imbalance between racial treatment of patients, I think it would be a
systemic
great time
discrimination
to really kind of put your two pieces on that, or if you have a guest you'd like to see us bring into that, I think it would be powerful because we look forward to that conversation.
Absolutely. Well, then in 1968, clinics in Kansas City, Chicago, and Seattle were opened, and by 1970, 10 more clinics across the United States were opened for People's Free Medical Clinics.
It's powerful.
Right, and this was also a big deal because with the free clinics came the free screenings for sickle cell anemia. Now, as anybody in the Black community knows, that is a disease that is primarily targets African American people. A lot of people don't get screened for this. They suffer through this disease without treatment, without getting help.
Without knowing that they even have it.
Without even knowing, right. So because of the awareness that the Black Panthers brought to sickle cell anemia and their testing for it, the U.S. Congress actually passed the National Sickle Cell Anemia Control Act of 1972, which allowed for genetic counseling, testing, research, diagnosis, and treatment of the disease for African American people. Yeah. So again, another incredible thing that came to fruition because of something the Black Panthers started and brought awareness to. So it was a pretty incredible situation with the medical clinics. And I am proud to say that one of the few remaining People's Free Choice hospitals still out there today is actually right here in Seattle, Washington.
Come on, Seattle.
An incredible woman who was a very wealthy woman helped fund the Seattle branch and helped take over it when most of the other clinics were all closed down. And she kept it going, and it is still going today 50 years later.
And still making a powerful impact on the
absolutely.
community, right?
Yeah.
And so, unfortunately, the story of the Black Panther Party did not end well for all involved, right? Some of the party suffered death, right? Many of them were in prison, but some of their greatest voices are still alive today, right? You have people like Tupac, whose mom was a part of the Black Panther Party. His music is still alive.
Right.
I don't believe he is, but that's a great conspiracy. Maybe we can dial into in the future. Maybe he's stowed away, kind of like maybe he's hanging out with them QAnons. You know what I'm saying?
There is that.
You got the whole flip side, but anyways, with the Kennedys. So over history, right? The story of the Black Panther Party has been twisted. It's been turned a little bit.
Yeah.
And certainly it's been diminished in the accomplishments that they've had in the community. One of the reasons why is because of the attack by the FBI.
Yeah.
Right? Their interaction with the party. Talk a little bit about what you discovered, how it affected your thoughts about that party, and where you kind of at with it now.
So it's really interesting. So in 1968, the FBI director, which is J. Edgar Hoover, said that the Black Panthers were one of the greatest threats to national internal security. And then in 1969, they declared them an actual terrorist organization.
Right. In addition to that, one of the first Caucasian groups, the only one that I know of up to modern times, recent times, that was named a terrorist group, and that's the KKK, including the KKK, including the white supremacists, those types of groups, which I don't want to necessarily name all of them. Proud Boys kind of being in that flutter, right? Was the White Panther Party.
Yes.
Because the Black Panther Party was not discriminatory.
They weren't.
Right?
No.
They were not a racist
No.
organization. So when asked, what can we do to help?
Yes.
Right? They said, you can form a party and stand in unity with us.
Yes.
Right? Which the FBI, of course, quickly named a terrorist organization as well.
Yeah,
Right?
the FBI didn't exactly like a white Panther Party group supporting the Black Panthers. That definitely, they ended rather quickly. Let's just say that.
Power to the people was not going to be all
That
the
was
people.
not. No, because, Hoover really had a personal agenda when it came to the Black Panthers. There was,
Tell that story.
There was a secret organization that the FBI created, and they nicknamed it the COINTELPRO group, and it was to disrupt activities within the Black Panther Party, the Communist Party, the Socialist Work Party, and the KKK. However, all resources and attention went strictly to the Black Panther Party. So they didn't focus on any of these other groups, nothing. They focused all their attention 100% on the Black Panther Party until it was gone.
They probably talked to him at lunchtime and stuff about it. Like, hey, we should stop a little bit. We're asking everybody else to slow down. Maybe we should slow down too.
Well, the truth is, with the head of the FBI just having this just personal attack on them, they really never saw a moment's peace. They were villainized. They were declared terrorists, and all they were trying to do was to defend their people and to bring awareness to the fact that these were big issues and they needed to change.
And they deserve center stage attention.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what had happened, the FBI was involved with all local armed forces as well, and basically told them whatever it takes.
Right.
Whatever it takes. So tons of raids were done on all Black Panther chapters constantly. One of the biggest ones, actually, and the most well-known ones, was the raid in Chicago in 1969. Now, this raid, multiple Black Panthers members were killed during this raid, and the police official statement was that basically it was this giant shootout, bloodbath, that over 200 bullets were shot their way.
Their initial report,
yes, stated this. In addition, the captain actually stated that it was just a miracle, but not one police officer had been shot.
That.
Not one. And
sounded a little Breonna Taylor like.
Right, we were like reading this story, and I'm looking at Richard thinking, okay, look, I may not have ever been in a gunfight in my life,
Sure.
But if you are in a gunfight and over 200 bullets are being shot at you, one officer minimum has to have at least taken a bullet.
Sure.
Which makes you wonder, well, if all these officers were unwounded, then how are all these Black Panthers dead?
Right.
So the thought is, well, maybe because the Black Panthers weren't armed. Maybe it was the police that came guns blazing into a house of unarmed people.
Sure.
it's just a thought.
Mm-hmm.
However, just a good thought. However, the stories did evolve as into what happened in the 1969 Chicago raid. Eventually, they stated that actually only one bullet was actually fired from the Black Panther Party that night. The rest all came from the police department, and the one person who fired the bullet was actually already dead, and they determined he was probably dead when the bullet went off from his gun.
Magic.
And years later, there was actually a federal grand jury hearing on this, and it was determined that the FBI, while they didn't directly order the raid, their involvement was so significant that the federal grand jury said that they were in fact responsible ultimately for this raid and the deaths of all these Black Panther Party members. And there was a lawsuit that the Black descendants of the people who had died actually won a lawsuit against them, the city of Chicago, over this.
Yeah, it's a very in-depth study.
Yeah.
And it's something well worth your time to invest in, find out more about it. It's very indicative as we kind of look at our modern time today. And a lot of people crying and not understanding fully why, of course, a beautiful life was lost in Breonna Taylor. But not understanding why our community is so enraged.
Yeah.
Why we're so engaged. It's because there's not only this incident, right? But there's a pattern that we've dealt with for as long as I've been alive, as long as the African American community, people of color have been in America. It's been a constant reality. And so when we raise our voices, yes, we are specifically raising our voice for Breonna Taylor. Do not forget her name.
Yeah.
Continue to raise her name. Continue to ask questions. Don't ever be satisfied with the shallow answer.
Yeah.
But it's because to the root and the core of our history, events like this are not new to us, right? And so it's something that we have to continue to press until incidences like this are rooted out of America.
And look, we aren't here to tell you, our amazing viewers, that we're not here to glorify anybody. We're not here to tell you, that they were right, that they were wrong. All we want to do is give you some factual history for you to maybe dig a little deeper yourself. To really look into what is the truth, because unfortunately our history is so whitewashed to the point where we have 28 days to learn about Black history when Black Americans have been part of our entire history here in the United States.
I think it's important too as parents of children, right?
Yeah.
All of a sudden now COVID-19 is hit, right? And we're actually home educating our children.
Oh, yes.
Now, thank goodness they're still somewhat participating in the sense of education through the public school system, in the sense that they got computers and they're sitting in front of that computer for 72 hours a day or whatever. It's it's ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
But they're learning in a new atmosphere. It's important for us as parents to begin to relook at history a little bit differently, because what we can do is we can begin to get into combat with the truth with our children. Right? They have this thing called new math, right? I barely understood old math, but now they got new math where they're teaching our kids all kinds of new insights, new ways to do it, right? Now, it doesn't make it wrong. As a matter of fact, it may be a better form of history or a better form of math. However, if I don't understand it at all, when my child comes to me, one, I can't help him process it, or I can't help her process it whatsoever. And two, I'm actually can be a stumbling block to them learning because I know what I know. And I have a closed mindset, right? And so it's important for us as parents, as an audience, Lionheart Institute podcast audience. I'm so thankful for you, whether you fully agree with us, whether you disagree with us, that we continue to enlarge our mindset and our understanding so that we can continue to grow. Right? So where are the Panthers now today, right? We got a world screaming Wakanda forever, and the only Panther they really know about is Chicago. Is what's his name? What's the Black Panther's name?
Oh, goodness gracious. I know.
Brothers in Heaven, and I forgot his name.
Well, Chadwick.
I
was trying to think of his name on the movie. I'm sorry.
But the Black Panther is beyond that movie, obviously. There isn't even a Wakanda. So where are some Black Panthers today? Where their stories lie?
Right.
Unfortunately, many lives were lost, but some still survive.
Yeah, so, over the years, Huey had been charged multiple times and was arrested multiple times for different crimes. I think Bobby was arrested for a few too. I mean, ultimately, over the years, many Black Panthers were arrested and charged with multiple crimes. However, for Huey, none of them stuck.
Right.
Because essentially they had no evidence really that he committed any of these crimes they were accusing him of. So he never actually stayed in jail.
Sure.
All of his convictions were overturned. But the Black Panther Party officially dissolved in 1982.
Right. Long after they killed Hugh.
No, actually, he did not die until years later.
Okay.
So after 1982, Black Panther Party no longer existed. Huey was actually assassinated in 1989.
89.
So,
Okay.
yep, in West Oakland, California. He was assassinated by a man of the name Tyrone Robinson, who was associated with the Black Guerrilla family. He was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 32 years to life in prison. It was determined that the reason behind the murder was over the crack franchise, drug related, was what the reasoning. However, there was no evidence to support that the Black Panthers were ever involved with drug trafficking or the crack franchise.
Of course, my conviction would be that they never were.
Right.
That you need to do your research. That it's definitely a very on the surface conspiracy that's pretty quick to understand what really went down.
Right. There is actual factual knowledge that the FBI were involved in instigating rivalries between Black nationalists and other groups. So it is believed that they definitely inspired the assassination.
Even many
him.
theories tiptoeing into the fact that they actually paid.
Right.
Gave benefit for doing so.
Right. Now, I am happy to say that Bobby is actually alive and well. I believe he's 84 years old. He's living in Texas.
Come on, Texas.
And he is still to this day working in the Black communities, trying to help elevate them and bring some great resources to them, and just really working in social services. So,
and his reach is obviously worldwide.
Yes.
Still, if you ever have a chance to hear him, he's a phenomenal communicator.
Mm-hmm.
His story is well documented and well worth researching.
Right.
And if you ever have a chance to support him, it's well worth doing.
Not
only in his work previously for what he did,
for sure.
as a thank you for American history and what the impact he's had, for what he continues to do.
One thing that I really was surprised and generally just awed over is the Black Panther Party had no issues with anybody. They welcomed help from everybody, every nationality. Didn't matter if you were white, Asian, Mexican. If you were willing to help fight for their cause of and bettering their lives, they were all welcoming to everybody.
Yeah.
They were not racist. They were not anti-white. They just wanted to fight for rights that they should have already had.
Sure. And it's so important that we share that story.
Yeah.
And we begin to grow in that. And I'm sure that there's a lot of people that will disagree with this episode. Feel free to dislike, like, comment. Leave your opinions in the comment section. We want to grow with you. We want to consider your thoughts. Perhaps do a follow-up episode in the future.
And, I shared my story of what I was taught about Black Panthers. I would love to hear other people, especially, from other white people, their history of the Black Panthers and what they grew up believing to see, kind of the different contrast of what we've all been taught.
And it's important that we do that. We share with one another. So as typical, we'll leave our email addresses below, or please do share them in the comments. We love to read them publicly, interact with them publicly, so we can all kind of grow together and debate these truths and these ideas so that iron can sharpen iron, and we can help grow America to the next level. Now, we're just doing our small part, but we're so excited that you're a part of our community, and we want to extend an invitation to you to become a subscriber.
Yes, please. Definitely, subscribe to our channel. The more subscribers we have, the more videos we get to put out. These videos mean a lot to us.
They do.
And, from feedback from you guys, they mean a lot to you too. So definitely subscribe, hit the bell, get all the notifications so you don't miss on an episode. Tell your friends and family, share, like, comment, and definitely tune in next week. We're going to have another great story about an incredible African-American person in this country that deserves a lot more recognition than they've ever gotten. So make sure you tune back and hear their story.
And check out some of our interview sections too, where you'll hear some amazing stories from modern day African Americans and people that have made an impact in our community.
Yeah.
And their stories are there to learn and grow from. God bless you guys, and thank you for being a part of the Lionheart Institute podcast today. I'm Richard Thomas.
And I'm Tiffany Thomas.
And we're saying see you next time.
See you soon.